RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. This is episode 28, October 1st, 2020. My name is Sunsara Taylor, and I'm a co-host of the show. I want to welcome you to all of our new and returning viewers. The Revolution Nothing Less show is about making an actual revolution and emancipating all of humanity. We get the name of our show from, and we base ourselves on, the work and the new framework of human emancipation that has been forged by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian. We also root ourselves in and bring to you the ongoing leadership he is providing to make this revolution real. And right now, a great part of this fight is concentrated in the political battle to stop the consolidation of fascism in this, the most powerful country in the world. This is a political battle that many others, millions of others from many, many different political perspectives have an interest in and need to join with to make real. How this is so and how this fight can be waged and won is something that Bob Avakian is providing ongoing critical leadership to. So this episode is rooted in that leadership. We're going to bring you some of that directly, and we're going to point you to where you can find more of it. So now would be a good moment for me to tell you that we produce this show in collaboration with the website revcom.us, and you can find on that website the body of work of Bob Avakian and the ongoing articles and leadership he is providing. We're broadcasting right now at a time when the Trump-Pence regime is accelerating its fascist takeover. Just 2 nights ago, on a national debate stage in front of the eyes of the world, Donald Trump refused to condemn white supremacists.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and white
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by.
He told fascist Proud Boys and fascists of all kinds to stand back and stand by. And then he made clear to the world what he wanted them to stand by for when he refused to tell his supporters to peacefully accept the election results. We are also broadcasting 2 days out from a major historic mobilization. Protests being planned across this country by refusefascism.org to launch day after day protests, nonviolent struggle that persists and grows, demanding Trump Pence out now. Each of us, each of you watching, needs to be in the streets this Saturday, and you need to organize and mobilize everybody you know and everybody you can reach. It would be impossible to overstate the stakes of this moment and the stakes that ride on this mobilization. Donald Trump has a plan and a strategy to stay in power, to murderously enforce injustice, to crush basic civil rights and liberties, to carry out and accelerate the destruction of the planet, and to continue to heighten the risk of nuclear annihilation, no matter how people vote. He is using and working to contort major institutions of this society, including the Supreme Court, as well as fascist, violent thugs inside and outside the government to carry forward and lock in his hold on power. And for their part, the Democrats are not fighting this the way that it needs to be fought. Why this is so is something that Bob Avakian goes deeply into in a series that you should read. In part 1 of a series, you should read the whole thing, called Voting Will Not Be Enough. We need to take to the streets and stay in the streets, demanding Trump Pence out now. You can find that at revcom.us. But again, the Democrats are not fighting this and will not fight this the way it needs to be fought, and yet it needs to be fought. So it falls on us, each of you watching, all of us together and everybody we can reach, for us to mobilize the millions who do not want to accept a fascist America, the millions who care about the planet and leaving a world that's inhabitable to future generations, the millions who care about women's rights and LGBTQ rights, who don't want to see women slammed back into the dark ages, back alleys, forced motherhood, or death. The millions who care about Black lives, who've been in the streets in recent months, the millions who care about the people of the world, who care about the children in cages and what's being done to immigrants, we have to reach them and we have to mobilize them in the streets now, starting this Saturday and every day going forward. And through our determined creative, nonviolent actions and sustained protests. We need to create a massive and growing and more powerful pole of attraction throughout all of society, setting terms with our demand that Trump-Pence must go right now, creating a situation where the whole dynamic in society has been changed because of our demand, where every force in society is compelled to respond to our demand that this regime be removed. This is what is required of us. This is possible. And this is what this show, what this episode is going to drive home and provide fuel and orientation to you to be part of. In fact, the main way you're going to hear from the main host of our show is we're going to bring you a speech that Andy Z, the main host of our show, gave this past Saturday at a mass meeting here in Los Angeles to people about where we're getting organized, a mass organizing meeting to launch these protests. We're going to break his speech into two parts. At the opening of the show, we're going to give you the first half of his speech where he talks about how important it is that all the different kinds of people coming together in this fight take this up and the vision of why this is needed and how we go forward. At the end of this episode, we'll bring you the second half of Andy's speech where he talks about the strategy of how we make this real, how we carry it forward. So Andy Z's speech will bookend this episode. In the middle, we're going to bring you 3 more installments of an important series that's been on revcom.us from Bob Avakian called Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist. This is going to be read to you by Noche Diaz, who's the national spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll also do a commentary on what's at stake in Donald Trump's nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat, and the fascist acceleration, record speed he's trying to get this locked in before the elections and what's at stake with that. And finally, in this episode, we're going to bring you a killer installment of the American Crime series. This has been produced and brought to you by a regular contributor to this show, David Zeiger, who's a documentary filmmaker. He made the film Sir No Sir, among others, a film about the GI resistance to the Vietnam War, which everybody should watch. And in this installment of the American Crime series, he goes hard at Donald Trump's proclamation and insistence that schools indoctrinate children with patriotic education that instills in them pride over the genocidal and slave-owning foundations of this country. So that's going to be very powerful. The episode as a whole is going to be very rich, give you a lot to understand and to carry forward in this fight that's now afoot. So with that, let's go right into Andy Z's speech. It's the first half that he gave this past Saturday, September 26th, in a mass organizing meeting here in Los Angeles, and it's a vision and direction for all of us right now. So let's hear Andy Z.
Recognize this, how much it matters that you have come out today recognizing the emergency that we face, that humanity faces from the Trump-Pence fascist regime and their determination to stay in power by any means and by all means. And recognize this, how much it matters that you have come out to brainstorm and to plan on how we can inspire, organize, and mobilize the one force that could actually stop this regime from doing what it's doing. And that force is all of you and all of us in our millions of people who represent and can draw from the hatred, the aching in the hearts of people all over this country for what this regime has done and for the 200,000 and for the thousands of people killed by the police in this country and the wars and the environment and everything else, the children in the camps and all of that. That's what you represent. And your recognition of that really matters. How much it matters that you have come out today recognizing that we have to start now. That these people are planning to subvert and steal this election requires that we start now. Beginning our protest next weekend. And then day after day. That's not going to be easy. I'm so pleased to see 50, 60, 70 people here, but you know when we get out in the street, that's not going to seem like a lot at first. But we have to start. And if we don't, well, Chantel said before, it's going to be a disaster. How much it matters that you and that we have come together when so many others say, and they've counseled us, and they've argued with us, say, well, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see if he refuses to accept the absentee ballots. Let's wait and see if he refuses to leave. Then we can take to the streets. Well, we have seen and experienced enough with this Trump-Pence regime to know that that would be a disaster. He is going to do this. Name one thing he said he's going to do that he hasn't tried to do, and most of which he has succeeded in doing. It's not just Trump, as Chantel said. It's a whole fascist regime. These fascists are organized even into political movements, even a paramilitary movement coming out of the Christian, fundamentalist Christian political movement. There are powerful forces in the ruling class that are behind this regime. They've purged many parts of the government, especially the security apparatuses, of people who might, in fact, disagree with them, and filled them with loyalists. And we should wait? I don't think so. These fascists are many and they are determined, but we are more. We are more than them. Their viciousness, they're using the Bible as a weapon against us. But what do we represent? Them with their Bible saying this represents plunder. We represent righteousness and justice. You have the interests of humanity. You have the interests, as Jolie just said, of the planet at heart. We have the potential and power of the people that we've seen in the streets in June and July and who've come out again in recent days in a spirit of defiance in response to the non-indictment of the police murderers of Breonna Taylor. And indeed, they have done so now, different than June and July, in the face of this law and order mantra from Trump and the actual killing of people and by these fascist mobs. And this is a power that needs to be built upon. They've shown courage and they've shown conviction. And we're going to have to do no less, and we're going to have to involve them. If we combine the moral certitude and the power of the people in the streets that we have seen around the why Black Lives Matter and the fight for that, combined with that, with the moral certitude and conviction that this concentration camps on the border have to end, that women have to have the right to be people, to be human beings, and to not have their reproductive rights stolen from them, that this environment has to be solved. If we act with that moral certitude and then combine that with the millions of people who haven't been involved, but who, as the reggae singer Eddie Grant once said, deep in their hearts they abhor what is happening here, then we could succeed with this. And never forget, as we start this endeavor this month, in the face of everybody saying, wait, don't do that now, that we carry the interests of humanity. So I got a little more worked up in the beginning than I intended to. But I do want to welcome everybody for being here. We're going to work with each other and we're going to learn from each other. When problems come up or the going gets tough, as it will, we have each other. We have to rely on each other. We have to confide our fears and talk about where our courage is going to come from. When we grow frustrated with our family and our friends who just go about their lives as if the world isn't burning and people aren't being put in concentration camps, we'll come together and talk to each other. And from that, we'll get the fortitude to continue, because what we're doing has to be done because it's right. Remember, we're not doing this just for ourselves. I'm not sitting here for myself. We're doing this because it's in the interests of humanity. That's what this is about. That's why you're here. My second point is this. October 3rd, we begin. But why begin now? Why not wait till the election is over and see if Biden wins, and then if Trump tries to not count the votes, or if, he says, I'm not going to leave, and then people will come out in the streets. Simply put, because that'll be too late. To wait is to invite Trump to intimidate and pervert the election every day from now until then. To wait is to say that the Trump-Pence regime is legitimate. It is not. Fascism is never legitimate. Slavery was never legitimate, even as it was the law and the founding principles of this country. Are we waiting to see if this regime can win an election by stealing it, and then finding ourselves saying, well, what can we do? He won. You see, that's part of the danger of us not acting now. I'm going to get into that. Or should we wait and see to follow the Democratic Party and the organizations that are controlled by the Democratic Party when they say we should act? This is a group that has played by a rule book that the Trump-Pence regime and the Republicans in Congress do not respect. They are changing the rules, and they're telling us to follow the rules. What do you think is going to happen if Trump steals the election? They're going to say, well, we've got to go where they're counting the votes. Well, we should file a suit here, hold a committee meeting here. If you're not in the streets already, this is going to be a disaster. And here's another thing. Do you think these fascists who are right now standing out here on, Santa Monica Boulevard in Beverly Hills, about 200 of them. There's a bunch down in a town south of here in Orange County. They're all over the country. They came out to the Refuse Fascism meeting in big numbers in Philadelphia to try to intimidate us. Do you think they're not going to be out in their thousands on election eve if we're not already organized? This is to seed the ground that we don't even have to, and it would also set the stage for the Democrats to concede and capitulate at that time. Without the kind of mass resistance, we are not going to be able to prevail, and that kind of resistance cannot be built overnight. If you think about it for more than 3 minutes, you will realize what it will take to build the kind of unity we need to actually defeat this regime. Stealing the election is going to require a lot of work, and all of you are here to be part of doing this. People do need to vote, and they need to deliver a resounding defeat to Trump in the election. But even for that to happen requires what we're preparing to do right here. Think about that. They are intimidating people. They are cowing people. He's ranting and raving. People are demoralized. There's articles every day in every paper in this country about this. We're going to be out there giving people hope and mobilizing the kind of campaign against the white supremacy, the xenophobia, the patriarchy that needs to be waged to save the environment. That should be inspiring people even to get out to the polls. Even as it is absolutely true, as we have said since we started this campaign, if we simply rely on voting, it will be a disaster. But indeed, we do have to vote. And what we're doing will actually help that.
This past Saturday, September 26, Donald Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett to fill the seat left empty by the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. The headline at revcom.us put it well, calling this a, quote, home run for fascism and oppression, and an imminent threat to abortion and all reproductive rights. To get into who Amy Coney Barrett is and what a threat she is on the Supreme Court, I want to read first from her own words. This is a quote from a commencement speech she gave to the graduating class at Notre Dame Law School in 2006. She said, "Always keep in mind that your legal career is but a means to an end. That end is building the kingdom of God. If you can keep in mind that your fundamental purpose in life is not to be a lawyer, but to know, love, and serve God, you will truly be a different kind of lawyer." Now think about what that means and the danger that represents. Let's be clear, it's one thing to have one's religious views inform your personal life, who you want to marry, vote for, etc. It is completely different and completely wrong to have your religious views shape the law, how the Constitution is interpreted, and the rights and the lives of millions of others throughout society. And in this regard, Amy Coney Barrett not only advocates a horrific position, but her record as a judge has demonstrated this. As a judge, Amy Coney Barrett has ruled to expand the rights of religious bigots to discriminate against LGBTQ people. She has backed up and supported Trump's cruel and vicious laws that would require immigrants to make the impossible choice between giving up medical care or food for hungry or sick children, or risk being thrown out of the country. Philosophically speaking, Amy Coney Barrett is an originalist, which means she believes the Constitution should be interpreted as it was intended by those who wrote it. Men who not only defended, but many participated in the system of slavery in this country. Now, to bring alive just one dimension of what Amy Coney Barrett's appointment on the Supreme Court would serve, I want to talk about Becky Bell. Becky Bell was 16 years old when she found out that she was pregnant. But she lived in Indiana, so she couldn't get an abortion without telling her parents, and she didn't want to do this. She was ashamed. She didn't want to disappoint them. So one Saturday night, she told her parents she was going out to a party. When she came home, she was disheveled, she was feeling ill, and she was in tears. Over the next several days, she got sicker and sicker, until finally her parents dragged her to the family doctor and she was hospitalized. By that time, it was too late, though. Becky Bell died on September 16, 1988, and the coroner, when they examined her body, ruled that it had been because of an unsafe, illegal abortion. Now, Becky Bell's life concentrates the shame, the fear, and the risk that is going to be put on millions and millions of women and girls as abortion becomes ever more restricted. Before abortion was made legal in 1973, millions of women, all women, lived with the fear of getting pregnant when they didn't want to have a child. The fear that they would be forced to have a child against their will, to foreclose their lives, give up their dreams, and be enslaved by forced motherhood, or risk their lives in a desperate attempt to get an illegal, unsafe abortion, and many, many women died doing so. This is the future that Amy Coney Barrett's appointment to the Supreme Court will make closer. And if there's any doubt, you can look at her record on this as well. Just last year, she had the chance as a judge to vote in favor of letting the state of Indiana, the state that killed Becky Bell, make restrictions on teenagers getting abortions even greater. And her record as judge also shows other rulings, restricting abortion and even women's access to birth control. But the danger of putting Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court goes far beyond her personal horrific views and rulings as a judge. Because appointing Coney Barrett, confirming her to the Supreme Court, would tip the balance of the court into a majority pro-fascist court, radically reshaping the highest court in the land into an instrument of fascist atrocity, an instrument of legal authority backing up the genocidally racist, the theocratically enslaving, the terroristically repressive, and the environmentally destroying program of the Trump-Pence fascist regime that they are racing to lock into place. But even this is not all, because a big part of the Trump-Pence program to carry this forward and to lock this in place is to stay in power no matter what happens in the upcoming election.
Well, we're going to have to see what happens, you know that.
Right now, Donald Trump is already stealing the election and preparing and threatening even greater levels of violence to stay in power should he lose. And he is actively subverting and perverting the election. In its call for people to come into the streets starting October 3rd and every day after that in growing nonviolent mass political protests demanding Trump Pence out now, RefuseFascism.org has called this a rolling coup. And this is a correct diagnosis. This is a rolling coup going on. And should we end up in a situation where the election is contested and gets thrown to the courts to decide, the Trump-Pence regime and the fascists around it want to make sure that they have a fascist majority on the court locked in place to tip the scales in their favor should they get to decide the election. Trump says this openly.
Yes, I think it's very important. I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I think it's very important that we have 9 justices.
In other words, at stake with this confirmation is both the consolidation of a fascist majority court and the carrying forward of a fascist coup to lock this direction in place. With all this on the line, you'd think the Democrats would be out there fighting, right? Wrong. Soon after this appointment, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said this. "Let me be clear," he said. "If Leader McConnell and Senate Republicans move forward with this, then nothing is off the table next year." Now, nothing is off the table is meant to sound tough, but right there he's saying next year, after this confirmation goes forward, after Trump has likely stolen the election or stayed in power some other way, after all this has gone down. This is not a fight. This is capitulation. And if the Democrats really wanted to fight this, they say, oh, we don't have the votes to stop the nomination. If they wanted to fight this, there's all kinds of ways they could do it. They could have shut down the government by denying funding. They could open up new impeachment hearings against any of the many crimes Trump has carried out. They could sit down on the floor of the Senate and refuse to let the proceedings go forward. Or most of all, they could call forward the millions of people in this society, the furious women, the LGBTQ people, black people and those who care about their lives, immigrants and those who care about the children in the cages and much worse to come, those motivated by a desire to preserve the environment, those who see what's at stake in this Supreme Court nomination. They could be called forward to struggle against this. But the Democrats have not done this and will not do this. The reasons for this are very profound, and they're talked about in a series that was recently published at revcom.us by Bob Avakian. The title of the series is important too. It's called Voting Will Not Be Enough. We need to take to the streets and stay in the streets, demanding Trump Pence out now. And in part 1 of this series, Bob Avakian goes deeply into the reality that the Democrats will not fight Trump the way he needs to be fought. He breaks down why it is that they do not want to arouse the millions who hate this direction to go up against it, especially up against the fascists who will not easily be backed down, because they don't want the stability that would bring to their system. These Democrats don't want to run on that. They don't want to defeat Trump and win through doing that, and they don't want to govern in a society where people's expectations and hopes to see an end to this oppression, to the oppression of women and LGBTQ people, to the terror against immigrants, to the white supremacy and police brutality against black people. They don't want to elevate these expectations because they cannot deliver, because their system needs these forms of oppression. So for these reasons and many more gone into in that piece, the Democrats will not fight this the way it needs to be fought. And this Supreme Court battle is a concentration of this. But our interests are not the same as the interests of the Democratic Party. Our interests lie with the people of the world, with humanity as a whole, and with stopping this nightmare. So it is up to us to call forward this anger among millions, the people who don't want to see this fascist nightmare go forward. It is up to us to call them forward in struggle and to take up and bring many of them into answering the call put out by refusefascism.org to pour into the streets starting October 3rd. And every day after that, across this country in public squares, raising the demand, Trump, Pence out now. Where there are struggles against this nomination, we should unite with them and we should bring this demand in. But most of all, again, we need to rally people's anger and their refusal to accept this fascism on the court and throughout the rest of society to join us in the streets demanding Trump, Pence out now, because unless and until this entire regime is removed from power, the question of a fully fascist legal system in this society and a fully fascist society as a whole is a question of when, not if. And that when could happen very soon. It is racing in that direction unless we stop it. So this nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, the fascist determination to ram this nomination through before the election, the abject capitulation of the Democratic Party in the face of this, all this has elevated the stakes. It is on us to call forward this anger and the outrage of the millions who do not want to see this happen. It is on us to bend every effort, and this nomination must fuel that. It must fuel that, and it must fuel us. The battle for the future is being shaped now. Trump, Pence out now, into the streets October 3rd and every day going forward from there.
I'm Noche Diaz, spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist, Part 6 by Bob Avakian. In his typical, crudely racist way, Trump has referred to Haiti and countries in Africa, as well as Latin America, as shithole countries, while insisting that we need more immigrants from places like Norway, an overwhelmingly white European country. With the same crude racism and xenophobia, hatred of foreigners, he declared that 4 progressive congresswomen should go back to the totally broken, crime-infested places from which they came, insisting they could not leave this country soon enough, even though 3 of the 4 were born in the U.S. and the 4th came here as a very young child. If Trump will say this about congresswomen, think about what he wants to do and what he has been doing with the masses of ordinary people he sees as coming from shithole countries. He would like nothing less than to purge this country of huge numbers of non-white immigrants and to impose a reign of terror on many who remain. If you still think this is an exaggeration, going too far to say this about Trump, then you still don't know who Donald Trump really is. Look for Part 7, further evidence of Donald Trump as a genocidal racist. This is a series appearing on revcom.us. I'm Noche Diaz, spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist, Part 7. Trump did not simply declare that white supremacist thugs in Charlottesville, Virginia were very fine people. He has repeatedly supported and spread the racist rantings of white supremacists through tweets and in other ways. To take just one example, not long ago, he retweeted a video of a supporter of his shouting white power. White power means and always has meant white supremacist murder and terror against black people in particular. It should be obvious to everyone what Trump means and what he intends when he broadcasts his support for white power. He means and he intends to use the full power of the government to bring about murderous terror against black people and all those he regards as less than human and a drain and a stain on the fascist, white, English-speaking Christian America that he proclaims must be great again and dominate all others. If you still think this is an exaggeration, going too far to say this about Trump, then you still don't know who Donald Trump really is. Look for Part 8, further evidence of Donald Trump as a genocidal racist. This is a series appearing on revcom.us. I'm Noche Diaz, spokesperson for the Revolution Clubs. I'll be reading Donald Trump, Genocidal Racist, Part 8 by Bob Avakian. Donald Trump loves and violently defends the slave-owning Confederacy as part of our great American heritage. He has condemned and issued executive orders to severely punish people pulling down statues honoring soldiers and leaders of the Confederacy who fought to preserve and extend slavery. These statues were put up to celebrate slavery and as monuments to white supremacy during the days of Jim Crow, when black people as a whole were openly segregated and discriminated against and constantly subjected to lynching and all-around terror for generations even after slavery was ended. What else can it be but genocidal racism when Trump insists on severely punishing people who want to bring down these monuments to slavery and racist terror? If you still think this is an exaggeration, going too far to say this about Trump, then you still don't know who Donald Trump really is. Look for Part 9, further evidence of Donald Trump as a genocidal racist. This is a series appearing on revcom.us.
We are not a nation of timid spirits. Our American ancestors sailed across the perilous ocean to build a new life on a new continent.
In 1779, General John Sullivan led 6,000 Continental Army troops on a mission to wipe out communities of the Iroquois Confederacy in upstate New York. Sullivan's troops methodically looted and destroyed every Iroquois town and village on their route, their progress marked by smoldering villages and blackened fields. Roughly 50 towns, 1 million bushels of corn, 50,000 bushels of vegetables, and 10,000 fruit trees were demolished, leaving death and starvation in their wake. Sullivan's orders came from the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, General George Washington, who wrote,
"The immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops now in the ground and prevent their planting more."
We're a nation of pilgrims, pioneers, adventurers, explorers, and trailblazers who refuse to be tied down, held back, or in any way reined in.
On December 26, 1862, 38 Dakota Santee Sioux men were hanged in Mankato, Minnesota. Surrounded by 1,500 Union troops and a howling mob of 4,000 white settlers, they were hanged simultaneously. This was the largest mass execution in U.S. history. The execution order came from the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln.
Forced off of their land and into starvation, the Dakota had fought a futile war against the Union Army. After the hangings, more than 1,600 Dakota were exiled to a disease-ridden concentration camp on Pike Island. Then in 1863, the U.S. Congress abolished the Dakota Reservation, declared all prior treaties null and void, and expelled the Dakota people from Minnesota.
These pioneers didn't have money, they didn't have fame, but they had each other. They loved their families, They love their country, and they love their God.
On the morning of November 29, 1864, 700 soldiers of the 3rd Colorado Cavalry, led by Colonel John Covington, stormed into a village near Sand Creek, where the Cheyenne people had been promised peace and safety by the U.S. government. The soldiers opened fire with carbines and cannons, killing at least 130, mostly women, children, and the elderly. Before leaving, the soldiers not only scalped the dead, but cut off body parts as trophies. Then they burned the village. Colonel Covington declared,
I have come to kill Indians, and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. Kill and scalp all, big and little. Nits become lice.
When opportunity beckoned, they picked up their Bibles, packed up their belongings, climbed into their covered wagons, and set out west for the next adventure.
In 1846, before the 1848 gold rush, 150,000 Native Americans were living in California. By 1873, only 30,000 Native Americans were left alive, and by 1880, they numbered 16,277. This was accomplished by starvation, disease, imprisonment, and massacres.
Ranchers and miners, cowboys and sheriffs, farmers and settlers, they pressed on past the Mississippi to stake a claim in the wild frontier.
the Bloody Island Massacre. In 1850, following a wave of attacks on Native Americans by white vigilantes, Captain Nathaniel Lyon led several Army detachments in a slaughter of up to 800 Pomo people at Clear Lake, 100 miles from San Francisco. The Daily Alta, California, reported,
The shrieks of the slaughtered victims died away, the roar of the muskets ceased, and stretched lifeless upon the sod of their native valley were the bleeding bodies of these Indians. Nor sex nor age was spared. It was the order of extermination, fearfully obeyed.
Legends were born. Wyatt Earp, Annie Oakley, Davy Crockett, and Buffalo Bill.
the Sacramento River Massacre. In 1846, as many as 1,000 Wintu people were murdered while fishing by a band of white men led by Army Captain John C. Fremont and guide Kit Carson.
Americans built their beautiful homesteads on the open range. Soon they had churches and communities, then towns, and with time, great centers of industry and commerce.
The Yon Taket Massacre. In 1853, a band of white vigilantes attacked a spiritual pilgrimage of Tolowa and Yurok tribes, killing hundreds.
A Tolowa historian, Loren Baumlin, said, Over 450 of our people were murdered or lay dying on the ground. Then the white men built a huge fire and threw in our sacred ceremonial dresses, regalia, and feathers, and the flames grew higher. They threw in babies. Many of them were still alive, and they burned the village to the ground.
That is who they were. Americans build their future. We don't tear down our past. I want every child in America to know that you are part of the most exciting and incredible adventure in human history.
My third point, I'm just going to say a few things about how we're going to do this, because that is a big question that this meeting was called for to answer. How are we going to do this together? So I'm just going to say a few things about this, and if a few means 3, I'm going to do something that's 3 by 3, okay? So that's 9 things. It's inspire people with a vision of what humanity is capable of, and that we are fighting to remove this Trump-Pence regime in the interests of humanity. It is organize people we know and people we don't know to be out in the streets. It is day after day, day after day, day after day, until this regime is removed from power. We have to do grassroots organizing. What does grassroots mean? It means people like us, ordinary people organizing other ordinary people. It means going to your family. It means going to your friends. It means going to your people who you work with, go to school with. It means going to the congregation down the block, whether it's a temple or a synagogue or a mosque. Going out, ordinary people organizing ordinary people, and starting with the people, the thousands of people who have been part of Refuse Fascism over the years. You know, we just had a rally in Chicago, a professor who cited another professor who talked about a village in Germany, and this is very important. He talked about one town in Nazi Germany, and he said they didn't have one thing that maybe could have stopped this. They didn't have a coalition of the decent people. What does that mean, and what does it have to do with what we're doing? It means when we look out there and we see all these different social movements that need to come together, and there's divisions among us, nationality, gender, all these things that we're having to overcome. But it does mean that there's a lot of people, millions of people, more than the 40 million people who follow Trump, who really do want to live in a decent world. They aspire to that. We have to reach into that, and we have to say, for that world that you want to live in, you need to be out in the streets, but we have to organize that. A speech like this hopefully can inspire some people to do some things and help answer some questions. But it's no replacement for the hard work. And it is hard work. It takes time. This has to be tactile. Okay, yes, use social media, but feel the keys, okay? Feel the keys. And don't go touching people, do the elbows but you got to be with people. That's a big part of what's going to make this movement stand in opposition to, by when you look at it, then those fascist MAGA mobs out here that are just spitting venom at each other and at us. We're going to represent something different. That's what I really want you to understand and take from this. And to do this, to get those people out in the street, we need a broad movement. We do need to reach into the Black Lives Matter movement, the immigrants' rights movement, the environmental movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQ movement, and we have to say to all of them, what you are fighting for at this point in history is going to go through removing this regime from the White House. However hard you have been working to save the environment, to do any of this stuff, you are going to confront the fact that anything that has been won can be lost. Any struggle that has gained strength can be shut down. There's unfortunately too many examples from history that attest to this. Right after Hitler was named chancellor, in Germany, 100,000 people took to the streets. And they fought for a while, but they didn't, for various reasons we don't have time to go into here, they weren't able to rally the masses of German people. And a great disaster happened. And you don't have to go back to the 1930s. You can look more recently to Turkey and see how the struggle developed there. And you can see how that is what's happening here. Think about this. 1 month away from him stealing the election, we should have 10,000 people in a stadium right now, or out on a big football field. That's what's happening here. All of us together, planning, relying on each other. That's what we're going out to reverse. We also need to be involving people who have disproportionate influence in society, the influencers on the internet, athletes, people in entertainment industry, people who are legal people, law students to be doing legal work, people who can help us with medical care, churches who can provide sanctuary, bathrooms, and water, and all of this. We got to go out very, very broadly. What the regime does, but now I want to just get into one point which Chantel alluded to before. How are we going to actually do this? Because we'll do our grassroots organizing. We can grow to a few thousand people doing that. But how is this going to grow to the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people? Well, here's how it's going to happen, most likely. Trump, quiet as it's kept, is going to do one outrage after another, probably 3 or 4 a day. If we're out in the streets every day with this protest saying, we have one demand, Trump, Pence out now, and we're speaking to those outrages and the new things he does every day, more and more people will be looking to what we're doing as opposed to what other people are doing. And will begin to say, you know what, I think they're right. He really is going to steal the election. He really is mobilizing these people. He really has stacked the courts, which he's just about to do in a very devastating way. They're going to see all of this. And then we become something that's thousands of people relatively on the margins of society, to something that becomes right in the center of the debate. Just as you saw in June and July, where you saw Democratic politicians who hasn't ever said the word white supremacy. It's white supremacy. Do you know there was slavery in this country? By the way, that statue was a slave owner. They never said that before. But people in their millions made that happen. And we can do no less, and we have to do much more to drive out this regime. And let me say this. Being just a wee child at the time, the 1960s weren't always the 1960s. When people sat in the lunch counter, in one case there was 9 of them, another case there was 12 or 13, I don't remember. Everybody took to the streets in their millions right after they did this and got beat up. No, there was a process that ensued. There were some people who were first. They acted on their convictions. They acted on their morality. They acted with courage. And then other people who supported them spread the word and fought with other people. I don't mean physically, I mean fought and came into synagogues and into churches and into mosques and said what they did is right. Donate money, but get your own ass down there. And many students responded to that. White students, black students, all kinds of people went down and tried to help with voter registration drives and against the laws against segregation. We're starting small, and we have to grow within 1 month. But we have right on our side, and we have what they are doing, what the Trump-Pence regime is doing, and what other forces who we want to act are not doing, like the Democratic Party in the way they should be doing. And I'm not talking about the people here who are a member of the Democratic Party or the people on the editorial board who refuse fascism who are Hillary volunteers. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the people up top. Because I tell you what, if the Democratic Party mobilized masses of people, the streets would be filled because they have the resources to do that. Then the question would be, what is the demand? And the demand is Trump, Pence out now. We are trying to get him out before the election. If you actually had millions of the people in the street right now, you have a shot at him being impeached or the wise heads of the Republicans and the Democrats going and said, you guys got to resign right now because we got a bigger problem on our hands than just you. So get out of here and then we'll try to regroup. That's what will go on. That's what happened with Nixon. That could happen here as well. I just want to say a brief word about the vision of what we're going to be doing. What we want to be doing is having a place where people can come every day in the beginning. They can find out what's going on, where there'll be programs going on, discussions going on, where people will be getting lots of materials and going out to neighborhoods, where we have marches that go from the central square out to the neighborhoods. Maybe in this town it would have to be car caravans, or get on the trains, get on the metro. And people will be marching to the town square. If we get some permits, we should be showing films and having discussions. Growing in numbers, the marches themselves becoming bigger and more determined as we begin to fill the streets, ultimately by the time we get into the month of hundreds of thousands of people. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to start something. We're going to have to spread the word. It's not one march. It's a whole process that begins by going to that central square and making an impact on society with that and drawing more and more people in. Now, I just want to say to you that much of what I've said today is drawn from an article that you can get at the table there that's called Trump's Fascism More Blatant and Dangerous Every Day, How a Determined Fight and Massive Mobilization Could Defeat This by Bob Avakian. The editorial board of Refuse Fascism has read this and thought it's an important thing that we're going to put up on the Refuse Fascism site. We recommend that you all read this. I'm going to end with this, which is from our call, the Refuse Fascism's call. You should have that with you. But really think about this. We will act on our principles, modeling the world we aspire to in contrast to the hatred and the bigotry of this fascist regime. We will act together with creative joy and with the conviction and courage of standing together not only for ourselves, but for all of humanity. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. So thank you.
That was Andy Z, the main host of this, the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, speaking last Saturday here in Los Angeles on September 26th at a mass organizing meeting held by refusefascism.org, preparing and organizing to launch the historic outpourings that start this Saturday. Just 2 days from when we're first airing this episode, all of us need to take to heart what he said. We need to take to heart what is happening around us in the world that we can no longer close our eyes to. We have to confront it and we have to act on it. So to end this show, I want to one more time directly call on each of you, every single one of you and all of us together, to be there this Saturday in the streets across this country to raise the demand Trump Pence out now and to join in determination to organize and mobilize thousands of others from every walk of life, growing to millions, raising this demand and not being backed off. The world, the future, it rests on what we do, and we have a big role to play. So I want to see you in the streets. I will be there myself. And just to close out, if you got anything out of this episode, if you appreciate it, if you learned something, I want to ask you to take a moment and share it with those you know. Spread it on social media. Hit the like button. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our channel, The Rev Comes, on YouTube, so you can get updates and watch every week. Keep your eye this week on the website, revcom.us, as well as refusefascism.org, because events are developing rapidly. You need to stay connected. And if we don't see you before then, we will see you here next week, next Thursday. Good night.